Today we have a topic that is often asked about. It is about anger. Okay, how not to punch anyone, even in your mind. So these are some of the things that are taught in Buddhism about anger, and this is quite important to understand because anger can be quite a difficult emotion to deal with. But let us first talk about what does Buddhism say about anger? The Buddha said that anger is wild, like a provoked snake. In the Buddhist text, they say that it spreads like poison. Sometimes when we're angry, we can find that it can destroy many things in our lives. Anger can be like some burning feeling, something you'd like to destroy someone or something. And when you feel that burning sensation, it can be like it's burning its own support. Less like just like a forest fire destroys the very forest, the very source from which it comes. And in that way, eventually it ends itself. In the same way, anger, it arises from your own mind. And even before you can hurt anybody else, you have already hurt yourself. This is an important aspect of anger in Buddhism. The Buddha also said that being angry at somebody is like throwing dust into the wind because it will always come back to you in some shape or form. Even just the moment when you're angry, you are already feeling not good. It's impossible to be angry and at the same time feel good. It can be destructive, like an enemy preying on somebody. It's like anger, it sometimes can be lingering and just waiting for a weak moment in our mind to show, to appear. And in that way, it sometimes can be quite deceptive, can fool us. Just like medicine mixed with poison, in the same way, sometimes we want that anger, we want that resentment, because somehow it feels there's something sweet to it, but actually it's just poison. In total, the Buddha mentions 9 causes. The Buddha said that these 9 causes tend to be the causes for hatred or anger or frustration to arise, also known as the akata watu. First of all, he divides it into past, present, and future, because this is different kinds of anger. When we dwell on the past and are angry about something that happened in the past, it tends to be in the form of a grudge. But if we are thinking or ruminating about the future, it can cause us to be suspicious. Nothing happened yet, but we are already suspicious, and it is a form of anger because it's this fearful emotion wanting to lash out to protect. And then there is the sort of present anger that we have in the very present moment, which is almost biological and is in biology known as the fight or flight, or sometimes the fight, flight, or freeze response. When you have a grudge, which is probably the most common form of anger, it can be because you are hurt yourself, you feel you were hurt, or because somebody you love was hurt. This is more subtle. And then sometimes there's this other kind of anger, which is weird. We are not angry because somebody did something wrong, but because they do something good to somebody we don't like. In other words, they are of the same group of other people that we don't like. And this is known in present day English as group hatred, right? We are angry not because somebody did something wrong, but because he belongs to a group of people who we perceive to do something wrong. This is, of course, a very common form of anger. when we are living in a country where there's conflict between different kinds of people, it can happen. Sometimes it can be ethnicities, like differences in culture or origin, or it can also be the income or the level that people are, for example, being resentful because somebody is rich, or being resentful or looking down on somebody because they're poor. Then there is the present kind of anger. This is how I already explained this, that it's similar to the others, but it's different in the sense that it gives this sort of sense, this present day sense of wanting to defend or wanting to do something, and it happens with a sudden situation, this kind of fight or flight response. When we have suspicion, on the other hand, it's more subtle. It's subtle because it hasn't really happened yet, but we are just a little bit fearful all the time, and this causes anger to shape. You are angry because you are afraid that somebody might hurt you. You are angry because they might hurt your loved ones. Why do we have to mention all of this? Well, to show you that why in Buddhism we are so negative about anger. Why do we compare it with a snake or with a forest fire? But what if you're just a little bit frustrated or something? Well, that is not considered a sin in Buddhism, but it can be something that we need to work on. Learn to be more spacious in our mind, to be more open, to be more patient. And the Buddha, he also said that the problem is with anger, that even if you think that you can use it to justify, to really hurt somebody who should be hurt, right? Then it tends to work in the wrong way. In other words, many of the things that we wish bad to other people, they tend to come back to us. So we come back to the same metaphor that the Buddha often used, or is often used in Buddhism. That is the metaphor of throwing dust into the wind, and it just comes back to us. When we are not angry, or when we have learned to overcome anger, it doesn't mean that we are passive, or that we have no feelings, or that we are somehow meek or weak. There's a famous passage in the Buddhist text in which there is a very an interesting discussion about this topic. And it's been recorded in 3 verses. In this, the Buddha said, "To repay angry man in kind is worse than to be angry first." Now here you might be wondering why. Why is that? Well, think about it. If you have a nice relationship with your husband or wife, and then suddenly you get into a fight, one person gets home angry, maybe not yet a problem. Maybe not yet. But then one person comes home angry and the other person is also angry with that anger, then you have a problem. So when we are angry at the same time, this is not a good thing. In fact, one person asked our abbot in Thailand, Longpo Tamachayo, he asked him, what do you give as an advice when people are getting married or have a long-term relationship? And he said, just don't be angry at the same time. Okay? Do not repay angry man in kind, and you win a battle that is hard to win. Now, remember, these words are from the Buddha. Okay? And then the verse continues. He practices for the welfare of both, his own and the others. When knowing that his foe is angry, he mindfully maintains his peace. When he achieves the cure of both, his own and the others, the people who consider him a fool are those unskilled in the Dhamma. So in other words, when you're not responding to somebody's anger with more anger, then that is actually a very wise thing to do. So this is all nice and well put, maybe, but maybe it's a bit of a lofty goal. It's a bit of a difficult aim to want to overcome our anger, right? Maybe didn't the Buddha ever say anything about how we can overcome our anger? He did. He talked about how to overcome your anger when you are already angry. And he talked about how to prevent anger from being part of your life too much. First of all, first stop, how do we overcome our anger? By developing loving kindness. If we can do that, that is the best. Because loving kindness, as you may be aware, it has this pervading effect. Maybe you noticed. But if you are familiar with the practice, it just means that you wish good things to all living beings in this world, and you practice this wish. You might also allow a sense of peace to expand from your center. Compassion is similar to loving kindness, but it is more active. We actually think of all the suffering that the other person may have. When we are seeing somebody suffer, we want to help the other person. The third thing is developing equanimity. If you notice, there is also a fourth item here that says do not pay attention to the person you are angry with. So it's not the same as developing equanimity. Equanimity, therefore, is more than just not paying attention to something. It is a general even-mindedness. You can practice this by simply meditating regularly. When we meditate, we are learning to overcome or to transcend our favors, our fears, to transcend our biases to people. To develop equanimity is simply to learn to allow your thoughts to come and go. And as a process, as a consequence of that, you develop more even-mindedness. You learn to just let your thoughts be, and you also learn to gradually connect with one single object in meditation. Your mind becomes more clear as a result. Also, one way to deal with anger is to consider that everybody is the owner of their karma. Everybody will eventually have to carry the consequences of all the bad things they have done. This is what Buddhism teaches. There is a law, there is a set of causes and conditions and effects that are part of this world. And when people act out of anger, they're always going to meet with suffering. As the Buddha said in the Dhammapada, when people act out of a misdirected mind, they will always encounter suffering. Then the Buddha also talked about preventing anger from arising in the first place. So first of all, he said, if somebody does something wrong, maybe you look at their words instead and not their deeds. Secondly, he said, if somebody says something wrong, maybe you look at their deeds, not their words. But how about somebody who says and does things wrong? Sometimes people have their good intentions, but it just comes out a little wrong. Then some people, they don't do anything good. Like I already mentioned, right? Some people, they just do a lot of hurtful and harmful things. So what do we do about that? Why can't we be angry with these people? Well, it's not like we endorse what they're doing. It's not like we're saying, this is good, please do continue. No, but we have to think of these people as sick people. They are ill, they're suffering from something. That is why the Buddha said, sometimes the best response to anger is compassion. And then some people, they just do a lot of good things. Everything's good, and we still feel angry because they're so annoying. Did you ever have that experience? I don't know. maybe some people. Well, that is envy, right? Sometimes we may have this feeling of envy. Think of think of it like this. Sometimes not everything has to be very interesting. Some people may be a bit boring, but they do a lot of good. And the other thing is, when we are really jealous with somebody, maybe we just have to look at something else. There's always something that is good, that is going for us, that is good for us. Finally, when we are learning to gradually overcome our anger and to take a more positive look at other people, overcoming our negativity bias, we are gradually going to be able to deal with anger better. And then we can go through the process gradually learning to forgive. And when the Buddha talked about gradually learning to forgive and forget, he compared it with anger written like a line. When you are when you are angry and you write in the like etching in stone, right? And it's going to last for a long time. That is anger in its worst form. We want to preserve this moment of suffering forever. That's not helpful. Then the second kind of anger is anger written like a line on earth. You write it in the earth, in the sand. That will last for a while, but not too long. In Thailand, they used to say, you can be it's normal to be angry for a day, but never be angry more than a day. And I think that's a useful principle. But the Buddha even goes farther and he says, sometimes it's good to develop our forgiveness further and to learn to have only anger like a line written in water. So sometimes there may be a bit of frustration, but you don't allow your anger to lead your life. Finally, there's a famous story in the Buddhist texts about Dikavu. And Dikavu it's a long story, but the short gist of it is that this Dikavu, he had his parents were killed by a cruel king one day. And one day he had the opportunity to take revenge and to kill that king who had once killed his parents. But Dikavu, he was a wise person, and he remembered the words of his father, who once said, "Do not look long and do not look short. Hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal." And the Buddha, he used these words have often been quoted, and often this is translated as hatred is never appeased by hatred. By love alone is hatred appeased, or is hatred conquered. That is a way to translate it as well. But non-hatred can also mean forgiveness, compassion, can also mean patience, understanding. So hatred can never overcome hatred. That is an eternal law that the Buddha said. Dikavu, he made the decision not to take revenge for his father's death, but eventually he was able to get back his kingdom that his father had lost, and to do that in a wise and compassionate way. It's a beautiful story. So this is all I would like to share with you today. So I would like to give you all a final blessing. May you find happiness and peace in your life. May you find loving kindness, compassion in your heart, and may you always prosper in the path of inner peace. Sadhu.